These youngsters from Liverpool, England.
The significance is that the Beatles have held this title for 8 years.
My model of business is the Beatles. You know, they were four very talented guys.
Hello, I'm Jack, and you're listening to the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast, an interview show about the Beatles' influence in the past, present, and future across the universe and across generations. Welcome back to Here, There, and Everywhere. I'm Jack. I have an amazing guest today. His name is Rowdy Gaines. Rowdy is a two-time Olympic swimmer who spent many years at the top of the swimming world as a world record and American record holder. He was the fastest swimmer on the planet in the 1980s, and he won 3 gold medals in the 1984 Olympics.
The sentimental favorite, Rowdy Gaines, is going to win a gold medal. He's got it. Rowdy Gaines has won the 100-meter freestyle, a time of 49.80, a new Olympic record, and you won't see happiness all week to match that. He just won himself a gold medal, Jim.
During his career, he broke a total of 14 world records. He's been inducted to the U.S. Olympic Hall of Fame and the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and now works with charitable organizations and is the Vice President of Aquatics at the Central Florida YMCA. He's also known as the voice of swimming and has worked with CBS, TNT, and ESPN as a regular announcer for swimming and other events, including the Olympics. Hey, Rowdy, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
Good, Jack. Good to see you. Good to talk to you, my friend. I was just telling you before we came on, you're so young to be such a great Beatles fan, but I appreciate that so much.
Oh, of course. I've been a Beatles fan my whole life, and, you know, the Beatles are just timeless, and they span across generations. How old were you when you first found out about the Beatles? Were you young?
Yeah, I was. I kind of, you know how it's funny, Jack, because you're a little young, but I remember when, the Space Challenger blew up, when I was a, younger guy. I was in my 20s. I remember when Ronald Reagan was shot. I have vivid memories of certain things that happened in history. And it's like, I remember it was yesterday. I was 7 years old when Yellow Submarine came out. I was just a kid. And it was just something that my parents played on the radio on the way home from school. I was like in first grade. And I'll never forget them playing that song and my mom saying, "Oh, I love this song." And from that moment on, I was hooked on the Beatles. I didn't really have much knowledge of the Beatles before that. But that song literally hooked me on the Beatles forever and ever. And it was such a simple children's song too, in a way. I mean, it's not literally a children's song, but in many ways it is. And if you think a lot of the Beatles songs really are children's songs. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, everybody thinks it's about LSD, but it's really about Julian coming home and telling, his father about this, this drawing, so you can really relate. Rocky Raccoon. I mean, there's so many that you could literally build a children's album of. For me, it was Yellow Submarine.
Ah, I see. So the Beatles' children's songs were what hooked you into them.
Yeah, they really did. And my mom and dad went out and, bought the White Album. I think it was a couple years later. Would that come out in 68, I think? And
1968.
And I remember playing that. And this is back when we played LPs. We didn't have tapes or cassettes, and I played that until the needle wore down. Over and over and over again. My parents just thought it was so cool.
I think that's awesome. And were you swimming at this point in your life?
No.
Or when did you start getting into that?
Yeah, I didn't start swimming until I was 17 years old. I was a junior in high school, so I started later in my life swimming-wise, but really fell in love with music before that. Not just the Beatles, obviously, more so than that, but I fell in love with all kinds of music through my parents, through my mom and my dad. My stepfather was really into music. He had this big speaker, and we used to listen to all kinds of music. But the Beatles were always our favorite to listen to throughout, I don't know, throughout all the different albums they came out. I wouldn't say I'm a connoisseur of the Beatles. I don't know every song. I just love I love the group, and I bought their anthology, so I own every single song that they ever came out with, and I listen to them all, the old and the new.
So if you had to pick a favorite album, would it be the White Album, or which album would you choose?
Yeah, I think the White Album is my favorite, to tell you the truth, Jack. I mean, gosh, it's hard to pinpoint because there's so many. I love Rubber Soul, Sergeant Pepper's. I mean, I, I even like Let It Be, and I know a lot of critics don't like Let It Be, but I love Let It Be.
Right.
So there really isn't a song or album that I don't really love. I will say I my least favorite, which is still my beloved Beatles, but my least favorite are the very first albums because it was a little before my time. Even that early '60s sound was a little bit
Right.
before my time. But again, you know the songs like I Saw Her Standing There, I love it. You know what's cool, Jack? And I have to get this in. I have Sirius, so I listen to the Beatles channel probably 80% of the time, right? And they do the fans favorite once a year. They do the top 100 fan songs or whatever. And you think
Yeah.
about these songs, right? Like, I can't remember the numbers, but like Get Back was number 68. How can there be 67 songs better than Get Back? I just, it blows my
Right.
mind about that their collection of diversity and songs that are so popular that you can't even imagine, like the number 68 song. How can there be? It just blows my mind, and I have to get that in because they have so many great songs. That's why picking an album as your favorite is hard. But the White Album
Yeah.
brings back the most memories for me, if you know what I mean. I mean, that's the one that
Right.
really I can collect my memories more so from my childhood. I was 9 years old when it came out, and there were so many great songs, obviously, and it's a chaotic album. I mean, it's
Uh-huh.
freaking all over the place.
Oh yeah.
You're right, right, and that
Yeah.
that can kind of throw you for a loop. And some people aren't crazy about the White Album because of that. Revolution #9 or whatever. I mean, there are some songs on there that are a little crazy, but
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
what made it so brilliant, right? Literally, they were that far ahead of their time.
You mentioned that there are, so many Beatles songs better than one of their best. And, the Beatles are regarded as one of the best bands of all time, if not the best. And I'm
Oh,
wondering.
they're the best, dude. Come on, they're the
Oh,
best.
yeah, hands down. Yeah.
Not one of the best. They're the best. Come on, you can't
Yeah,
argue that they're the
totally.
best in history.
So I was wondering, coming from someone with a lot of experience in competitive backgrounds, the Olympics, you set so many world records for swimming. What characteristic do you see in the Beatles that gives them that competitive edge when it comes to not only 60s music, but they're still competing with contemporaries today?
Right. Well, I think, if you're comparing my career to the Beatles, there is no comparison. I'm so far down that totem pole, it's unbelievable. But I do think, they had incredible teamwork. The Lennon McCartney relationship was one that was utter and complete trust for so long. And I mean, I know they had a falling out at the end, but really their brilliance was the fact they did it together. And two of my gold medals, Jack, were on relays. So I won 3 gold medals in the Olympics. One of them was in an individual event, the 100 free, but two of the other gold medals were on relays. So I had to trust my teammates unconditionally. And that trust between the four of them, obviously, but also specifically Lennon and McCartney, was critical, I think, to their success early on and throughout their career, even when they had a falling out. And I had to tell you, there were many times I swam on a relay with guys I didn't particularly like, but I knew in order for us to have a brilliant race, for us to win, we had to come together in the moment. And I think that's what was so special about Lennon and McCartney specifically, that they came together when it counted. And nothing was evident more than that. Than I know you sent me some material to work on. But the greatest documentary in history, Get Back, you could see that in Get Back when they weren't getting along, yet they came together so well.
Oh, absolutely. And I'd actually love to hear your thoughts about that movie. Have you seen all of it?
Oh, all of it, twice.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Yeah. I watched all 6 hours twice or whatever it was. Yeah, I know you've probably heard this a million times when you've talked to your guests, but it's literally like you're sitting there with them. Yeah, you're in the room. It's like a peek behind the curtain. It's like watching, Michelangelo paint a painting. It's like watching Da Vinci paint the Sistine Chapel. It's literally but being with the greatest rock group, arguably the greatest artists in history, and you're sitting there with them for 6 hours. I know there are a lot more hours that Peter Jackson put together, but he allowed us to sit with them for hours and hours and hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen any of them live by themselves in concert?
Yeah, I've seen most of the documentaries. Excuse me. Ron Howard did a great documentary on them as well. I forget what it was called. Hard Day's Night.
Yeah, 8 days a week.
8 days a week. Right. That's right. 8 days.
Yeah.
That was a great one too. I love the fact
Mhm.
that they stood up for equality and racial justice when they wouldn't perform the concert in Jacksonville unless they allowed blacks into the concert, which was just, again, these guys were so far ahead of their time that having, oh my gosh, my mind went blank on keyboards during Get Back.
Billy Preston.
Billy Preston, to have Billy Preston, that took a lot of guts in the late '60s, right?
Yeah.
When there wasn't a lot of racial equality. So they were well ahead of their time in so many different areas of their music. And yeah, I've seen a lot of their concert footage, but 8 Days a Week is a great documentary too. Oh, and I just saw the one with Paul McCartney and the producer. Oh gosh, what's his name? Where he went
Rick
over
Rubin.
all his songs. Yeah, Rick Rubin. That's a great one too. That's on
Yeah.
Hulu, I think. Yeah, that was really good.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Oh, dude, it's really good. It goes over some of Paul McCartney's songs, but most of it's Beatles. And what Paul McCartney was thinking about when he was doing. And Rick Rubin's such a great producer, and he was going over what some of the songs were and what Paul McCartney was thinking. So he kind of got into the mind of Paul McCartney, which was really cool. And Paul McCartney today, which, yeah, you should see that. It's really good.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I've been meaning to watch it for a while now. Have the Beatles influenced your life in any way?
Oh, I would say definitely. This is before your time, obviously, but when the Walkman came out, I don't know if you remember the Sony Walkman or people talking
yeah.
about it.
I've seen pictures.
Yeah, right. When the Sony Walkman came out, it came out about when I was about 19, 20 years old. I remember rushing to go get Beatles tapes, and I would listen to that music before my races. And so they were hugely influential in getting me prepped for my races. But just overall, Jack, they broke up when I was 10 years old, right? Or 11, when they break up in 71, 72, right? I was, 10, 11 years old. I mean, and really they were kind of split up even before that. I mean, even the White Album was done, a lot of it separately. But so their music lived on with me as an influence individually. All four of them individually played a big part in my musical taste, obviously, but just in their legacy, the kind of things that music can inspire inside yourself, to do your very best. And most of their music was about peace, especially for John. It was like living just a wonderful, carefree, peaceful life, and it's something that you can kind of live by for sure.
Oh, yeah. I think we need more of the Beatles' music and message in the world today. That's the reason why I love doing this podcast, is to keep that energy spreading. And if you were 10 when the Beatles broke up, you must have been in your teens or in your 20s when they were in their solo
Yeah.
careers. Did their solo
Yeah.
careers have as much as an effect on you as they did
Oh
as a
yeah,
group?
absolutely. I mean, I don't think I have every Paul McCartney album, but I have most of them, And from Ram on, he was always my favorite because his music shaped me from so many different ways that he was present. Meaning, you know, James Bond. He goes out and makes Live and Let Die. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and I love James Bond. I'm a big James Bond fan, and to listen to Live and Let Die, it brings me back to the memories of watching Roger Moore as James Bond, and things like that. And he had such a brilliant, and still to this day has such a brilliant individual career that it's hard not to listen to a lot of his songs and not let it take you back. And those
Right.
songs would take me back to when I was about your age. So I'd say he was my favorite, but if there's a 1A, then John Lennon was 1B. I mean, it's hard to differentiate between those two. I'm the same way. I have most of John Lennon's albums. I love what he stood for. My heart was broken when he was assassinated. Uh, and talk about your memories. I remember in detail. I even remember what the set was that day in our swim practice. I remember what we went
Wow.
in practice that day when he was assassinated, because he was assassinated, during the day, but it wasn't announced till that night. And so the next morning when we came into practice, I remember details of talking to my teammates about it. I cried. I was 21 years old, 1980, right? Wasn't it 1980?
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
yeah, so John was a big influence. George Harrison might have my favorite Beatles songs of all. While my guitar
Really?
gently weeps, it might be my favorite Beatles song. So George was a big
Mm-hmm.
influence, and then Ringo with Yellow Submarine. So they all impacted my life one way or another from a musical side, and from a inspiration side.
You mentioned George Harrison. I think it's actually his birthday tonight at midnight.
Oh, is it really? Oh,
There,
I didn't know that.
yeah, there was
I
always a big
follow you.
debate about
I
his
follow
birthday.
you. Yeah, I follow you on Twitter, so I know you'll tweet about it.
Oh,
And
totally. Yeah, it's coming out.
yeah, yeah, I bet. No, George was, and that was another tragic situation. I remember when he died. Different circumstances, obviously, but when you lose somebody like that, mean that has meant so too much to you, and to know that two of the four are gone, it definitely leaves a void, in your heart. And
Yeah.
we don't want to make too much of what these guys mean, because really the people that mean the most to you should be that your loved ones, your family, the people that impact your life on a daily basis. But the Beatles they impacted me. I can't deny it. From at least from a musical standpoint, and from the songs and my memories of my life. I remember so many details of each and every one of their songs, and where I was and what I was doing when it came out. And that means a lot. You know, even following their personal lives, John's breakup with Yoko, and them getting back together, and his sons being born. I mean, it's just, you followed their life. Even the controversy, when John came out and said they were more popular than Jesus, and was really kind of taken out of context and stuff. And you remember all the details. Well,
Yeah.
like
And
dude, even songs like from the White Album, "Why Don't We Do It in the Road?" It was such a dirty song, right? I'm
right.
like 10 years old, and you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, listen to this. Why don't we do it in the?" I'm going, "Oh my gosh, can you imagine?" Right? You're thinking about these things, or back in the USSR, it was like, "Oh no, it's the Soviet Union. What are they talking about? Soviets, the evil empire." That kind of music was really kind of cool. Even Come Together,
Oh, for
like,
sure.
come together, you're thinking all the dirty stuff. I'm like playing it with my friends,
Yeah.
so. But and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, back then, we're thinking it's about LSD. It's not, obviously, but that's what you're thinking as a kid. Oh, Lucy, the LSD,
Right.
crazy.
And it's crazy that I think they still have that kind of. They're still provocative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
among
Yeah,
kids today. Like, I remember when
yeah,
I was in 6th grade listening to them on YouTube. Not,
yeah,
it was only 10 years ago, I guess a little over.
yeah.
But
So long ago.
and I was doing the same thing with my friends too,
Yeah.
and it really
Right,
doesn't
right.
change, I guess. Yeah. Same
That's right.
songs.
From one generation to another, you think? And Helter
Yeah.
Skelter, oh no, and especially when the Manson murders came out, oh no, Helter Skelter, and it just every step of the way they impacted history in many ways, and you can ask pretty much any artist, and I would bet you 90% of them will say they were influenced by the Beatles one way or another.
Mhm. Oh, totally. And, you mentioned before that you were listening to the Beatles songs in your headphones before your races. Do you remember which songs you would listen to?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it would be music to make me relax a little bit. I love Let It Be, because it's just a natural soothing song, so it would relax me. I loved Hey Jude because I just got into the rhythmic ending of that song where they say, na 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 na, like how many times they did it, like 70, 80 different times. It's a rhythmic music that kind of gets you into a kind of a rhythm for me. Again, this is taking you way back, but and then the Revolution. You get up for Revolution, where it's just like the screaming and just John's vocals on that were just crazy. I could name song after song that I would listen to. Basically, what I was listening to, Jack, was the album, the Beatles' greatest hits. The blue one and the red one. I don't know if you've
Oh,
ever
yeah.
seen those, but they have a blue one with their most recent songs, and I think the red one were their earlier songs. So I had that on
Yeah.
cassette tape. So I would slide that into my Walkman and listen to, the greatest hits.
Oh, that's
Uh,
cool.
yeah. Again, I'm not professing to be some Beatles expert. I mean, you're the expert. I just profess to knowing a little bit about them, a little bit about each one, and I'm just a huge fan.
Rowdy, what are you up to now? Have you been involved in anything recently?
Yeah, I still do the broadcast for the Olympics. So, I broadcasted the Olympics in
Right.
Tokyo and still do all the broadcasting. I work for a foundation now that raises money for drowning awareness. Children drown at an alarming rate, Jack, in our country. And, water was such an influence in my life. It was part of the fabric of who I am today, even. And so I work for an organization called the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance, and we have a philanthropic mission called Step Into Swim. So we raise money, and the money we raise goes directly to lesson providers to help children learn how to swim. So I do a lot of work with them, and I work full time for them, and still travel quite a bit, on the road quite a lot, and living out in the country. That's why you're
Awesome.
seeing probably so many bugs and funky light. Dude, I live a mile out in the country on a dirt road. So
That's
this is my
nice.
best spot to get internet. And there's bugs like crazy out here now. So anyway, sorry about that. If you're seeing bugs cross my screen.
Just like Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney lived out in the country for a while too. He loved it.
Yeah, he
I would
did.
like to do
He
that
did.
someday too.
Yeah. Well, George Harrison wrote "Here Comes the Sun," kind of out in his castle in the country.
That's right. Yeah,
That
it's
was,
yeah, it's
yeah.
totally my I hear traffic going by my street all the time. I live in New York and it gets to be it creates a desire to go out into the country. So
I'm so proud of you, dude, for for loving the Beatles. That's so cool. Your Twitter handle, I love
Oh,
following you
thank
on
you.
Twitter. And for to be 25, there's not a big appreciation in your generation, I think, of the Beatles. And I know there are some. I'm not saying I'm not lumping the whole generation into that group, but it's cool to see the younger generation. I have four daughters, and a couple of them like the Beatles. A couple of them aren't familiar with them. A couple of them like them, but not like you. And so it's really cool to talk to you and kind of get a feel for. I love talk, dude. I could talk. It's like swimming. I can talk Beatles all day long and never get tired of it. Right? It's just like
Right.
I can literally just sit there and talk about Beatles and the stories behind. Dear Prudence, and just I can talk about the stories behind how they wrote the songs,
Right.
Dear Prudence is about Mia Farrow's sister, wanting them to come out while they were during that transcendental meditation, she wouldn't come
I
out
know.
to play, so it's just like,
It's so cool. There's a whole
right? It's
culture
so
behind
cool.
it.
It is it's so cool the story behind
Yeah.
the story behind the songs, that you grew up with or that you love,
Right. Rowdy, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. Yeah, it was such an honor to be able to speak with you. I mean, you're one of my heroes. You're one of my siblings' heroes. Who they used to race in
Well,
swimming competitively in high school and college.
oh, cool. Awesome, buddy. Well, yeah, we'll have to reconnect again.
Oh, for sure.
All right, brother. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. If you like the show, be sure to rate it, leave a review, follow us on Twitter at Beatles Earth so you don't miss any updates. Follow us on Instagram, we just started that at Beatles Earth. Follow Rowdy at Rowdy Gaines on Twitter. And as always, I will see you next week. Thank you for your support.